edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking from Washington, D.C. It is currently the afternoon of Friday, June 29th, 2018. It's slightly after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It has been a tempestuous and tumultuous week, and we have drawn new inspiration to the need for struggle. This is the moment to show what you are made of, morally, intellectually, politically, and in terms of goodwill and the desire to fight for what you believe in. We are headed towards a new birth of freedom in the United States. The current regime is going to be the icebreaker of a kind of revolution because of their overreaching, overweening, exorbitant demands for power, and because simultaneously of their monstrous corruption. Talk about the swamp. Oh my God, you'll be hearing about this. And we're also facing tremendous dangers on the international level. We've got now a summit of appeasement, capitulation, groveling, national disgrace, humiliation when Trump kowtows to Putin, the Lord of the Kremlin in Helsinki. The word Finlandization during the Cold War, Finlandization meant a country close to the Soviet Union that was turned into not quite a satellite, not occupied militarily, a country that was often allowed to do certain things in terms of its internal policies, but when it came to foreign policy, they had to take dictation from the Kremlin. Finlandization. Well, get ready for the Finlandization of America. The White House has already been Finlandized. We've got the chief poltroon, look it up, the chief poltroon in the White House already began surrendering and capitulating to the Kremlin on the way towards the summit, which the summit is supposed to be July 16th, I believe. Well, he's already begun, right? He put out, now he reverted, he backslid. He's got recidivism going on. He's back now to his line. I'm not sure. Who knows whether Russia did this or not? The translation of that is similar to that speech at the end of July 2016 when he said, Russia, if you're listening, get me the Hillary Clinton emails and you will be rewarded, richly rewarded. Well, this is another call for help. It essentially says, Kremlin, help me out now. You can see that my electoral fortunes are in a shambles because of the revulsion of the American people for this bloody clown show, this ape theater, but with tremendous, very sinister overtones. He's going to need help, and that's what he's going to be bargaining for. Plus, of course, the question of what do they have on him, as Brennan of the CIA said, I don't really know anything, but it looks to me like they've got something on him. Well, I'm afraid that may be something to take seriously. Now, we want to talk about first the perspective of struggle getting through the summer. We know that it's now practically the end of June. June has gone by very, very rapidly. A month ago, we were saying that we had 90 days until Labor Day, and what was likely to happen was some kind of escalation of the Mueller investigation. And we know that Senator Warner of Virginia, perhaps in an unguarded moment, but this is a minor peccadillo in this world that we live in right now, in this national, again, ape theater. Warner said it's going to be a wild summer buckle up, hold on. It's going to be a wild summer. And this is a reference to initiatives in particular coming from the Mueller investigation, the only one that is not dominated by, in effect, corrupt partisan Republicans, enemies of the people, fans of dictatorship, friends of oligarchy, and so forth. And then we had this interesting Watergate veteran, right, former Watergate assistant special prosecutor Ackerman on MSNBC pointed to the fact that it is expected that big indictments will drop by Labor Day. Big indictments. That means against the big people. And we've got all kinds of fighting going on. If we have time, we'll go through the clown show of Gowdy, Slickums, and then, of course, this Jim Jordan, a gutter snipe of the last level of quality, trying to bait a cabinet officer, the very dignified and very gutter snipe, this Jordan, right? Congratulations to all you Tea Party voters, right? You Tea Party voters who have made it possible for a national disgrace like Jim Jordan to be there. Go to my Twitter, that is Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter, and you will see the details on the lady who is challenging this Jordan in his district. Maybe there are patriotic Americans who don't want a Russian representing them, because that's what they've got now. They've got a Russian representing them in Congress. And a lot of people just don't want that when the country is in danger. But now, we have this problem with Justice Kennedy leaving the Supreme Court as of, I guess, tomorrow, this weekend. And what to do about this? We are bracing for a raving reactionary, although sugar-coated, most likely. A wolf in sheep's clothing is the smart move. That may not be what Trump does, though, because he's looking for the grand gesture. He's looking for the grandiose publicity stunt that will endear him to his base. That is to say, those backward, marginal people, those vindictive and embittered individuals who, broken souls, wounded souls, if you like, who are looking for some kind of vicarious thrill in politics through inflicting suffering on other people, tormenting them, perhaps, right? This is what we have. After 2,000 years of Christianity, we've got religious leaders who also support this stuff, right? Heretics and apostates, many of them. But now here's the problem. We've got to go into this with the idea of fighting and fighting to win, to prevail. What's the key? Well, the Democratic Party, of course, is a miserable excuse for a political opposition. Look no further than Nancy Pelosi. She put out a Twitter last week attacking Maxine Waters, a valiant fighter in my book. Maxine Waters, obviously can't endorse everything she's ever said or done, but in terms of the general idea right now, Maxine Waters has been pointing towards the one solution that would get the country out of this crisis, at least to a significant degree, and she's been calling for the impeachment of Trump. Well, that puts her historically on the side of the angels, but Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to do that because that interferes with her parliamentary cretinism and her corrupt horse trading and idiotic games. We'll be back to describe where we go from here on World Show. Now, you're going to need us more than ever over the next 2 or 3 months. From here to the November election is now July, August, September, October. 4 months to destiny, okay? And we're formulating, we can call them perhaps the November theses or the October theses, but the idea is there's going to have to be a fight. You want to be part of it. Join the American system Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. the American System at americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. And quick turns of the situation, as we've had this past week, you've got to be in touch with me every weekday, and then this broadcast on Saturday to provide some background and look forward to the coming week. So that's important. Please go to americansystem.tv, join up, americansystem.tv, support my work. This is a unique voice. I'm not kidding. You'll hear it. Stay tuned, and it will become obvious. But now we've had Nancy Pelosi writing that somehow she thinks it's the responsibility of the Democratic opposition to keep America beautiful. Keep America beautiful? Well, if you're the sanitation person in chief, or if you're the cleaner-upper, I guess that's okay. But not political opposition is not that, especially when you're talking about the need for an anti-fascist, anti-totalitarian political opposition. Anti-oligarchical is another way to put it. She says, I'm a woman and I'm a progressive. Sorry, it's not enough. You've got to have more guts and more initiative than you have shown. So we've been calling for quite a few months now. Get rid of Pelosi, oust her, do it now. The Republicans won't know what to do. They'll be running around like chickens with their heads cut off because they've built their whole fall strategy on essentially two things, right? One is attacking Nancy Pelosi, the Bay Area San Francisco liberal with all the overtones that has, and of course MS-13, and they put it together. Hucksterby, the elder, right? The grave and pious Hucksterby put out a thing saying, here's the 4 members of the MS-13 killer gang, and that's Pelosi's campaign committee. Ha ha! Rollicking. And then his daughter protests when she's asked to leave. I'm sorry, you're not presentable. In German, they would say you're nicht salonfähig. You're not capable of being brought into the salon because you're just too crude. You're too boisterous, right? You're a hoyden. So this is the situation. And we noticed that poor Joe Crowley, somebody that we had hoped, we wanted Crowley to be a very easy solution for switching, get Pelosi out and put Crowley in there. Very different kind of person, a machine boss, sounds like a proletarian, big city guy, New York, tough guy, Irish, all that. Great. Get Pelosi out, get Crowley in. Wasn't done. And now the leadership is being renewed. It could have been renewed according to a plan. It's now going to be done sort of ad hoc, thanks to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And congratulations to her on winning. We're hoping for the best. We'll be looking at her perhaps more in detail next week, but that's fine. That's democracy in action. But now we're left with Pelosi, and we still would like to see Pelosi spend more time with her family. She didn't have to leave Congress. She should still keep doing fundraising, but she's not a suitable leader for the kind of time that we have now. So the Democratic Party is too complacent, too passive. We know what it is. There are Wall Street Democrats. Pelosi is a Wall Street Democrat. Schumer is a Wall Street Democrat. Many of them are Wall Street Democrats. The majority. Maybe not in the House, right? The House looks a little bit different, but the complacency in the Senate and so forth is also overwhelming. So they've got to get ready to actually fight. And this will not be easy because their idea is to be collegial, to be courtly, to exercise parliamentary cretinism. In other words, that the little rules of their social club are somehow more important than the lives and welfare of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people in the country. So here's the thing. Before we even get into the details, how do you block Trump's nominee? Because that's the task. You don't have to wait to find out the exact name we're getting names, okay? We'll tell you a couple of names here, and they look really bad. So here's what you have to do. It is possible, of course, it's eminently possible to stop Supreme Court nominees. Go back to Nixon. He had Carswell and Haynesworth that he tried to put in, raving reactionaries. They were rejected. And then under Reagan, which is what we'll get into, he put forward Robert Bork, who was turned back. He was defeated. Then Ginsburg, who had run a computer dating service for college kids in the 60s. He was defeated because of his marijuana proclivities, which at that time was a crippling thing. And then finally, Kennedy. And of course, Kennedy was not a 1,000% hardline ultra-reactionary. He was only a 75 to 90% ultra-reactionary. And we're going to find out some more stuff about him. Maybe we'll learn more about him because he's going to have to be investigated, outgoing. And we may have another impeachment count in a bill of impeachment on our hands. We'll get to this in just a minute. But let's go back now to a Democratic Party that still had some fighters. Remember the lion of the Senate? It was Teddy Kennedy. We know his career, flawed tragedies, right? Assassinations, accidental deaths, very embarrassing, and so forth. Misconduct, to be sure. In other words, a human being of our time. So let's go back to the second term of Reagan. This is now the Iran-Contra period, right? Oliver North, Felix Rodriguez, all these people running around. Drugs were being sent into the United States. The money was being used to buy weapons for the Contras, but also then to purchase IHawk and other advanced weapon systems for Iran. Yes, the Republican Party. Reagan, of course, Alzheimer's, water on the brain, whatever he was able to plead that he didn't know. So what we're gonna hear from now is how Ted Kennedy turned back the Bork nomination, or in short, how Bork was borked. World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on this last Friday of June. It's also the end of the quarter. We're at the midpoint of the year. We just had Saint-Jean-le-Baptiste. Congratulations to all of the Québécois, the French Canadians of Quebec. This is their big holiday this past weekend. So good wishes to all of them. And, of course, a voice crying in the wilderness, that's not a bad model for all of us, ultimately. Now, when the vacancy on the Supreme Court emerged under Reagan, of course, mired in scandal, lame duck, losing it in terms of mental abilities. This was now Justice Lewis Powell. Powell had been appointed by Nixon, but he had moderated to some extent. He was, in some ways, a swing vote, a little bit similar maybe to Kennedy. And he retired at the end of June 1987, so just 31 years ago. And the question then was, who would replace him? Reagan was warned. Ted Kennedy and other Democrats informed Reagan, look, don't put an ideologue in there or we will do everything we can to destroy that nominee. If you put in somebody who's a moderate, who's a centrist, we won't give that person an excessively hard time. But otherwise, you're going to face a solid phalanx of opposition against an ideological extremist who will tilt the court to the reactionary side for decades and decades to come. Democrats warned Reagan, you put in this guy Bork, there'll be a big fight. Now, people knew who Bork was, right? In the infamous Watergate scandal, in the Saturday Night Massacre, we had special counsel, special prosecutor Archibald Cox had been investigating Nixon, wanted to get those tapes. Nixon wanted to keep the tapes. He was a fool. He should have destroyed the tapes. But that's another story. So Nixon wanted to fire Cox. We've gone through this. It's very, very relevant. It's kind of like the firing of Comey, and God forbid it would be the model for the Mueller crisis. If we get to that, that would be a constitutional crisis. So the question then was, who would he put in? Well, he put in Bork. Bork was the guy who had fired Cox. In other words, Nixon ordered Elliot Richardson, blue blood, attorney general, liberal Republican, fire Cox. No. And then Nixon said, okay, you're fired. Then it comes to Ruckelshaus. Again, my knowledge of him is a foul-mouthed guy in his private life. Maybe that's somewhat partial. But he said, no, I'm not going to do it. No. Then who was degraded enough? Who was a degraded person, an ambitious careerist, willing to do it? Well, it was Robert Bork. He was the Solicitor General, right? The guy who usually argues at the Supreme Court. Now, this is October 1973. Now, skip forward 14 years, almost to June 27th, 1987. Reagan says, okay, I want Robert Bork, an ideologue, strange-looking guy with a beard, right? And Ted Kennedy, much to his credit, was ready to go. He had a speech ready, which set the tone. By acting fast and by seizing the high ground, Kennedy was able to frame this debate in a very, very effective way. We're still waiting for somebody of note to come forward and say, this is no good what Trump is trying to do. We're hoping that when the name of the nominee is known, that Schumer and company will be able to go to the Senate floor, and maybe with not just one, but a series of 5 or 6 votes from the relevant factions of the Democratic Party to get out there and say, no, no, no. This has to wait until after the election, or better yet, it should wait until the Greek kalends, meaning never, never, no, no, never, to translate from the Hungarian. So Ted Kennedy's speeches. I want to give you these quotes because it gives you the spirit. Then we can look at some of the details. Here's what Kennedy said. Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back alley abortions. Blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters. Rogue police could break down the doors of citizens in midnight raids. School children would not be able to learn about evolution. Writers and artists could be censored at the whim of the government, and the doors of the federal courts would be shut on the fingers of millions of citizens for whom the judiciary is and is often the only protector of the individual rights that are at the heart of democracy. And then he goes on. It's an interesting speech. It's not that long. You can read it in less than 5 minutes. President Reagan is still our president, says Ted Kennedy, but he should not be able to reach out from the muck of Irangate, meaning the Iran-Contra scandal, right? Oliver North, Poindexter, people getting arrested, people going on trial, special prosecutor Lawrence Walsh of Flushing High School, one of my personal heroes. President Reagan is still our president, but he should not be able to reach out from the muck of Irangate, reach into the muck of Watergate, in other words, bring in this discredited, widely hated Watergate figure, taking part in obstruction of justice in the service of Nixon, right? That was his big credential. He should not be able to reach out from the muck of Irangate into the muck of Watergate and impose his reactionary vision on the Constitution, on the Supreme Court, and the next generation of Americans. No new justice would be better than such an injustice. Now, today we could say Trump is still president, although the signs are ominous. He's still the president, but he should not be able to reach out from the muck of Russiagate, and you'll hear, into the muck of, back into the muck of Russiagate, I would say, and impose his reactionary. Look, Ted Kennedy knows what reactionary means. Go thou and do likewise. Imitate him. His reactionary vision of the Constitution on the Supreme Court and the next generation of Americans, right? A lot of these issues are just about the same. Now, let's also just give you a quick version. That's a speech Ted Kennedy gave on the Senate floor. Then at the beginning of the hearings, let's see, Bork was introduced by Jerry Ford, that great paragon who pardoned obstruction of justice and other constitutional crimes. Ted Kennedy spoke up against Bork. In Robert Bork's America, there is no room at the inn for blacks and no place in the Constitution for women. And in our America, there should be no seat on the Supreme Court for Robert Bork. President Reagan has said that this controversy is pure politics, but that is not the case. Now, if you want to go online, take a look. You'll find one of the first television ads on judicial matters. It is narrated by the distinguished American actor Gregory Peck. And this is People for the American Way attacking Bork. Here's what Gregory Peck says. You should go and watch this. Robert Bork wants to be a Supreme Court justice, but the record shows that he has a strange idea of what justice is. He defended poll taxes and literacy tests. And we'll finish this in a minute. I'm not going to rush through this because these are words to live by from Gregory Peck attacking Bork. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we're giving you a sampling of the methods used by Ted Kennedy and others. This was a time when Biden still had some idea of what to do. We had people, even dubious people. Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio was part of this. Howell Heflin of Alabama, last Democrat in that seat until now. They all got together and defeated Bork. And it was, what was it, 42 to 58, 56, something like this. Anyway, the ad we were just going through is Gregory Peck, 1987, People for the American Way, attacking Bork. Bork has defended poll taxes and literacy tests, which have kept many Americans from voting. He has opposed the civil rights law, and he has he opposed the laws that spelled the end of whites-only signs at lunch counters, right? Public Accommodations Act. So the idea is here that the reactionary positions of this guy Bork were, of course, they were pretty much fascistic. So it was right. Now, they had warned Reagan, if you nominate an ideologue, you will get an ideological backlash. If you put a pragmatist in there, then we will probably be much more understanding. You know, you are the president. You have a right to nominate some judge, but you're not allowed to shift this, to pitch this entire country into fascism for the next 20 or 30 years. You've heard these quotes. Go and look at them. So what does this guy stand for? Well, we've just heard it. Poll taxes, right? The worst regressive taxation. Literacy tests. These are devices to prevent black voters from voting. No civil rights law of 1964, right? Rand Paul still opposed this, right? Public accommodations, no, that violates private property. Sorry, you're a common carrier. You can't do that. And you can't segregate lunch counters and do all that stuff. So what you're seeing there is a fairly decent attack on Bork that's rooted in policy. but then it also has to do with his ideology. In other words, Bork, today to get borked, well, it depends on who you are. If you're a reactionary today, to be borked means you get subjected to a character assassination which is unjust. In reality, of course, to a normal person like us here, to be borked means that you are exposed, that things you have actually said, written, done, your actions, your track record is brought up against you to prevent you from getting these tremendously powerful lifetime appointments to the federal bench, to the, not even the federal bench, but the Supreme Court. Before this happened, though, borked meant something else. To get borked in 1985 or 1986 it meant you have a case at the District of Columbia Circuit, and Bork finds against you, not based on the law, but based on this reactionary ideology that he had. He later wrote a book called Slouching Towards Gomorrah. This is from Yates, a very unfortunate source. The Second Coming, I guess it is. You know, what rude beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born, or something like this. So it's ugly, ugly stuff. Therefore, the point was then you had to defeat Bork using his own words primarily, right? But that's not allowed. So the Republicans scream bloody murder. They say, "Oh my God, this is character assassination. How dare you bring up his track record? How dare you illustrate his ideology?" What Bork had tried to do was that as he went on during the 80s, the academic world turned against him, right? Even law reviews turned against him. He was isolated there, and then he was isolated in terms of politics. So what he did was he tried to clean up his act in the last couple of years to try to tone down this stuff. But it was a fraud, and you can't allow that to happen. So he was defeated 42 to 58. And after this interlude with Ginsburg, this is where Kennedy came in. And you could see the fact that Kennedy was, again, not the 1,000% reactionary, but only a 90% ultra-reactionary. It has to do with this. These are the specific residues of the way this went down in 1987, right? If Reagan could have had a raving, Roland Freisler, look him up, he would have had him on the Supreme Court. But no, it had to be somebody like Anthony Kennedy who there had to be, from time to time, a note of camouflage in the form of moderation. All right. Now, Trump. What's Trump going to do? Well, Trump has already told us, right? We usually get this song and dance of saying, "Oh, no, you can't have a litmus test. We can't say it," right? Well, these people, right? We've seen it lately, right? Alito. We've seen Roberts. We've seen others will say, "Oh, no, you can't ask me what I think about specific issues. Oh, no, how dare you? How dare you? That's a litmus test. I can't do that. It's even illegal." Well, in that case, you should retire. You should quit. Withdraw your name, because we want to know. There have to be litmus tests. And in the case of these people from Trump, we know what they are. He said, "I want somebody who's going to overturn Roe versus Wade." And we also know the bigger picture. Here's the bigger picture. This is what you have to keep your eye on. The permanent austerity dictatorship. We have talked about this repeatedly over the last several years. There is no surprise here. The permanent austerity dictatorship. In other words, take the existing form of the U.S. federal government. How do you turn that into a dictatorship? How do you make that into a very oppressive, quasi-totalitarian form of government? Well, you need to do two things. You've got to wipe out trade unions, and you've got to make sure that people can't vote. Now, in terms of the unions, just in the past couple of week or two, we've had this question of the Janus case, right? Two-faced, like these guys when they go through their confirmation hearings, right? They always say, we believe in stare decisis. We believe in respecting precedent. We believe in sticking to the settled law that we have. Well, part of the settled law, part of the decisis that you were supposed to respect was The agency fees, it's the law in 23 states in the District of Columbia. It was based on essentially New Deal traditions, and it says if you go to a company and there's a collective bargaining unit that's working for you, you do not have to join the union. You don't have to pay union dues, but you make a token fee called an agency fee. In other words, to try to defray the expense of having people who speak up for you, negotiate for you, procure benefits for you, you get something in return, you should pay a small fee. Oh, no, said this character, Janus, right? That takes away my freedom, my First Amendment. This is known as weaponizing the First Amendment. In other words, in civilized life, there are all kinds of things you have to do. Buy insurance if you want to register a car and drive it. You have to, any number of things. We're not going to go through the whole list. But these are reasonable things. Unions should be regarded as an essential part of the apparatus of civilization. Look at the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In there, collective bargaining, the right to a union, is a basic human right. No, said Janus. He was obviously usefully present for the various billionaire interests, and this was now overturned. So public sector unions, AFSCME unions, cannot collect agency fees, and they went along with this. Back in a minute. To the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Topley here in Washington, D.C. So let's now look at this process of supposedly filling the vacancy, which we intend to block by balking the nominees brought forward by this reactionary cabal, the poltroon in the White House. Now, Kennedy, what kind of a person deliberately puts into the hands of Trump an element like Trump? If you're a self-respecting legal scholar, intellectual jurist, whatever it is, if you believe in civilization or the continuity of the U.S. government, how can you do that? Well, one way is corruption, and that's unfortunately what we now have to look at. Let's just fill in a couple of things here. For example, in today's New York Times, we find that Justice Kennedy has two sons, and one of them is Justin Kennedy. So Justin Kennedy is the adult son of Supreme Court Associate Justice Anthony Kennedy. And here's what we read in the New York Times. The younger Mr. Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, spent more than a decade at Deutsche Bank, eventually rising to become the bank's global head of real estate capital markets. And he worked closely with Mr. Trump when he was a real estate developer, according to two people with knowledge of his role. Now, by this time, we have learned that, unfortunately, Deutsche Bank would perhaps better be called Russische Bank, because it has shifted so much of its business into the Russian area. It had to pay a fine of, I believe, $10 billion because of money laundering that it had engaged in, and that ain't hay. So Deutsche Bank, again, it's perhaps wrong to see it as a German institution. It's sort of Eurasian. It looks east. Center of gravity has migrated very far down the road to Moscow. So Justin Kennedy was, for more than a decade, I think we're talking 1998 to 2010, I think is the time frame. Yes, 1998 to 2010, Justin Kennedy was the head of the real estate capital markets sector of the main force Deutsche Bank. This is not some private bank subsidiary. No, this is the main body of the bank, and he had extensive dealings with Donald J. Trump Sr. and apparently also with Donald Trump Jr. We're given figures that vary between $750 million and $1 billion in loans to Trump Sr. or Trump Jr. Here's what the New York Times says. During Justin Kennedy's tenure, again, the son of the Supreme Court Justice now outgoing, during Mr. Kennedy's tenure, Deutsche Bank became Mr. Trump's most important lender, dispensing well over $1 billion in loans to him for the renovation and construction of skyscrapers in New York and Chicago at a time other mainstream banks were wary of doing business with him because of his troubled business history. So he couldn't get loans anywhere else. He got them from Deutsche, and apparently one of the main people making this possible is Justin Kennedy. So it's a pre-existing link. Now, the relations were renewed when Trump got into office. And remember when he gave that first sort of equivalent to the State of the Union address? This was Trump's first speech to a joint session of Congress. It was in February of 2017, right? The beginning of the long and national nightmare. And as Trump went down the aisle there in the House chamber, he sidled up to Justice Kennedy, right? Because some of the Supreme Court people were there, right? Sometimes they boycotted it, right? Alito would say no, Scalia, no. But Kennedy was there, and Trump went over to Kennedy and said, say hello to your boy, special guy. It means say hello to your son, Justin Kennedy. He's a special guy. And this is Trump, the elder, the president, if we can call him that, is talking. Kennedy replies, your kids have been very nice to him. Who could that be? It could be Don Jr., could be Ivanka, could be Kushner, the kids. Your kids have been very nice to him. Well, Trump says, they love him, and they love him in New York. And as Politicus USA notes, it turns out that Justice Kennedy's son, Justin, knows Donald Trump Jr., and Jared Kushner because they have worked together in New York City real estate circles. Now, this is conflict of interest. This is a prima facie case that demands an investigation. Maybe the existing special prosecutor can do it. And in what context are we talking? Well, we've always pointed out periodically that one of the aspects of the Mueller investigation is likely to be the question of money laundering from Russia and elsewhere into luxury real estate in Manhattan and in other places, right? And you can imagine who would be involved in that. Now, Congressman Adam Schiff, the minority, right, the Democrat leader on the House Intelligence Committee, he speculated on MSNBC yesterday. Schiff says the following: what I would expect is that we will look at the work that's been done, and if the work that has been done by the Senate Intelligence Committee or by Special Counsel Bob Mueller has been done, and we have a full investigation, it may not be necessary to go further. But if it hasn't, we will have to look at the work that remains to be done. The idea is if the Democrats get control of that committee in January, which we hope very much that they will. One issue that concerns me is that essentially Nunes and the Republicans did not allow an investigation about the leverage the Russians have over this president in money laundering, and whether the Russians did here what they did elsewhere through the Trump organization, right? In this case, as they have done elsewhere. The Senate is not investigating that either. In other words, money laundering into luxury real estate. And therefore, that's something that Schiff points to. So this is now the swamp. This is the stench of corruption. What else can we say? But that's not all. There's more, I'm afraid. And this now extends to the other son, since he has two. This is going to be the Gregory Kennedy. And what do we know about him? Well, we'll tell you that in the next segment on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in New York. Now, we've just gone through this question with Justin Kennedy, son of the retiring justice. And there is now opinion spreading on the Internet. Given the ties between Anthony Kennedy and the Trump-Kushner tandem, there would have to be an investigation of Kennedy and his family to determine what the motivation for his retirement was. Why now? Why in this form? And were favors exchanged or anything of the sort? The conversation between Trump Sr., the poltroon, and Justice Kennedy at the essentially equivalent to the State of the Union. That was all caught on television boom mics, right? So that's documented, and we know beyond that there are a couple of other interesting little things on the Justin side. When Jared Kushner got into trouble, we're reading now in a publication called Medium. Medium says there's a financial relationship of the Justin Kennedy department at Deutsche Bank, 1998 to 2010. There's a financial relationship with the Trumps, including Kushner as part of that question. Justin Kennedy has supervised the lending of substantial amounts of money to Jared Kushner. According to Medium, when Kushner got in trouble, this includes 666 Fifth Avenue, who came to his rescue? None other than LNR Property, the company whose CEO at that time was Justin Kennedy. According to the New York Times at that point, Kushner and LNR reached a possible agreement with LNR Property, a firm specializing in restructuring troubled debt, which oversees the mortgage that would allow him to retain control of the tower, I think it's 666 Fifth Avenue, by modifying the terms of the $1.2 billion mortgage tied to the office portion of the building. So the kids have been very nice to his son. So they said, this Medium publication says, we know what Kennedy's son, Justin Kennedy, may have done for Mr. Kushner, but what did they do for Kennedy? Well, the New York Times writes at least that Anthony Kennedy was cultivated, courted, propitiated by Trump and the Trumps by hiring some of his protégés, in other words, appointing some of his protégés to the Federal Appeals Court bench. Now, those are the people, some of them anyway, who may now be the nominee. We don't know, but that's a very disturbing thing. I hope you will agree that that this can be a case in which it's going to be there's going to be suspicion, like there's going to be the appearance of possible quid pro quos, pay to play, and so forth, right? We're told that among the candidates we have Brett Kavanaugh. I think he has a link to the Kennedy cartel. Thomas Hardiman, Amy Coney Barrett. She's apparently a doctrinaire Roman Catholic who thinks that should reach over into her judicial opinions. Raymond Kethledge. Those are possibilities. There's also Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Well, of course, we've known all about Mike Lee in my book, Just Too Weird, which you better get. We have this interesting story of the Mountain Meadows Massacre of 1857, a group of pioneers in covered wagons. The Fancher group coming from Arkansas going towards California wants to cross this independent country of Deseret, as the Mormons called it, and they were massacred. And the leader of the massacre was the direct linear ancestor of Mike Lee, this guy John Lee, who was executed by firing squad at the site of the massacre some years after this. This was all part of the attempt to break up the United States during the Civil War period. So all of that going on. And, of course, Mike Lee, to get an idea of what kind of troglodyte, right, what kind of Neanderthal we're going to have. Mike Lee is somebody who says, well, federal child labor laws, right, the Wages and Hours Act and the Child Labor Act of the 1930s, those are unconstitutional, says Mike Lee. So this is essentially, we're going back to the Dark Ages, right? We're going back to the depths of barbarism and savagery like we've never seen it before. So the other thing, though, we want to make sure that we fill in this blank. There's also the case of this guy, Gregory Kennedy. Gregory Kennedy, the other son of the distinguished judge, now outgoing, this wonderful model of rectitude and judicial temperament. When the Trump people came in, they created these things called beachheads. Remember this? The so-called beachhead teams. The beachhead teams were going to be sent immediately into federal agencies to make them more reactionary, to make them more MAGA-ized. And Gregory Kennedy was sent into the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, where he was the senior financial advisor starting on Inauguration Day, I guess at noon, the 20th of January 2017. Now, what do we know about this distinguished person? Well, what we seem to know is that he was, we'll try to get the exact details, in addition to being this Trump appointee. That's a conflict of interest right there, I would say. Gregory, that is Kennedy's other son, Gregory, is a close friend of Trump's Silicon Valley advisor, Peter Thiel. We're reading again in Politicus USA. They went to Stanford Law School together. They're cronies. Kennedy's company is called Disruptive Technology Advisors, which has worked with Thiel's company, Palantir Technologies. Gregory has also worked here at NASA. So Gregory, buddy with Thiel, the libertarian, and you take it from there. They went to Stanford Law School, and Disruptive Technological Advisors has gotten business from Palantir Technologies. And there's another step in this Connecto, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So you get the idea that some of these appellate court judges that may now be named to the Supreme Court, nominated by Trump, may be part of this operation to essentially ingratiate oneself with the outgoing dotard Justice Kennedy by essentially having these people saying, "Oh, your legacy is in good hands. Look, we've taken all your former law clerks and we've put them on there." Gorsuch is such an example. Gorsuch is a former law clerk for Justice Anthony Kennedy. And there were others, right? Some of these names that I've just said, we'll get to them in detail. Not Mike Lee, I don't think, but others of this type. Then Gregory, the son, the other son, right? Justin is one son, Gregory is the other. Gregory is a close friend of Trump's Silicon Valley advisor, Peter Thiel. I think this advisory stuff has been attrited as time went on. They went to Stanford Law School together. Kennedy's company is called Disruptive Technology Advisors and has worked with Thiel's company, Palantir Technologies. Now, here we are. We go over here to CNN on March 28th, 2018, and here we read, Peter Thiel's Palantir Incorporated is investigating the links of an employee to Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica, of course, Alexander Nix and a bunch of others, right? They were instrumental in getting their hands on Facebook materials and making that available, some say to Russia, some say to the Trump campaign. Essentially, Cambridge Analytica was a key part of the Trump campaign. So this story goes like this. A data crunching firm co-founded by Facebook board member Peter Thiel, and now we got Facebook, right, and all the stuff that they did and did not do. A data crunching firm co-founded by Facebook board member Peter Thiel is investigating links between one of its employees and Cambridge Analytica. What do we hear? A statement from Palantir in this article says, we learned today that an employee engaged in an entirely personal capacity with people associated with Cambridge Analytica. We will be looking into this and will take the appropriate action. So Palantir has been a U.S. military contractor. This is Thiel, pro-Trump, spoke at the Republican convention and so forth. And this is this guy. We get some background from Christopher Wiley, right? The real whistleblower, not Snowden, not Assange, but Christopher Wiley, the guy with the pink hair, Canadian, right? Says he told the British Parliamentary Committee that Palantir staff had user data gleaned. They got access to the user data gleaned from Facebook. And we now know that one of the ways this all came about was through that mysterious Russian professor, right? This one. The contacts involved, Palantir says, oh no, we never worked on any Cambridge Analytica data. But the company released a second statement after evidence emerged of emails between Cambridge Analytica workers and a Palantir employee named Alfredas Chmieliauskas. This sounds like the Baltic states to me. Chmieliauskas worked in business development for Palantir after April 2013, did not respond. You get the idea. The Russian Facebook, by the way, is the Russian professor Alexander Kogan. He said, oh, I got it for academic studies. Well. We're from Missouri. So you get the idea, right? Look at this mass of stuff. Do the connecto, trace in all these things, make a flow chart, and that's going to be scary. That already merits a thorough investigation. This could be grist for the Mueller mill or some other mill, maybe more than one. State laws may be involved. There's also then the question of once the name of the nominee is known, where does that nominee fit in this pattern of material? And that will be important too. Who's he going to name? Is he going to name Rudy Giuliani? Is he going to name Judge Jeanine Pirro? We don't know, right? The sky's the limit. But if it's one of these sort of young wolves of the federal appellate bench, right? Maybe even a reactionary newly appointed by Trump, quite possible. Remember what they're going to do. The permanent austerity dictatorship. No unions. They can't collect agency fees. You can't have class action lawsuits against employers, or women can't do it, unions can't do it. And then, of course, voting rights. Well, the Texas gerrymandering is fine and dandy. So you get the idea. We've been talking about this for years. These two prongs, no unions, no right to vote, and then, of course, wild deregulation. You can't regulate anything. It's oppressive, right? Libertarian stuff thrown in to create a dictatorship. The weaponizing of libertarianism and extreme readings of the First Amendment that extend into every area, right? Except for some people are more liberated than others, right? In other words, the rich, the powerful, moneyed interests. Now, we will be following this. I urge everybody, make a promise to yourself that you're going to be more active in the coming 3 months up until this election, July, August, September, October, actually 4 months. Get ready to move heaven and earth and to defeat this plan of consolidating a dictatorship, right? Are we living in Italy between Mussolini's March on Rome, October 1922, and Mussolini's final consolidation of a dictatorship in January 1925 after the Matteotti assassination? Well, we certainly hope not, but that's an open question. The answer to that is largely up to people like you. Now, we've also got to worry about the Russia summit. We've now got this terrifying, horrific specter of an appeasement summit, national humiliation for the United States. Trump grovels for Putin July 16th in Helsinki, Finlandized just by going there, right? Why not get him to meet you halfway somewhere, right? Ireland or something like this. But no. Finlandization. Right? It's like Yalta. Roosevelt was sick. He had to go all the way to Yalta. Right? This was outrageous. They said Stalin's afraid to leave the country because there'd be a coup against him. Now, Mattis has met with Xi, and the question is the South China Sea. Xi says, we're the great Han dynasty of China. We're the Xi dynasty. We will not give 1 inch of our sovereign territory. Sorry, those are international waters. You can't just appropriate them like that under the current system. Kim of North Korea, Trump's great friend, is reliably reported to have executed a fairly high-ranking officer, colonel or something like this, for sending additional food and fuel to some of his units to say, well, we're not going to have to use all our resources to build nuclear weapons, so let's give you guys a peace dividend right away. No, executed by Trump's friend, Kim. Of the bodies that were supposed to be delivered, the remains, no bodies, no remains have been forthcoming. We have more in our final segment in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Got to cover some territory here in the final segment. Once again, join us day by day, week by week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. This is simply better. There's more going on here. Cable TV getting less useful now because the degree of class struggle against the oligarchy is increasing, and a lot of these people are useless. We had some really pathetic people. We had this Kornacki of MSNBC. He was so soft and weak that Matthews, of all people, blew up at him, right? We had this woman who used to work for the New York Times and now I think NPR, and she says, there's no way to defeat these people. Well, there is. There is. You can defeat Supreme Court nominees. We've discussed in some detail how Ted Kennedy led some efforts. So you want to be the new Ted Kennedy, get out there and fight. You want to be the lion of the Senate on your way to the White House? Well, here's the chance to do it. Now, Kim is killing his officers if they eat extra food and send that to their troops. No bodies have been brought back. So important, the human remains from the Korean War. And we're told that the nuclear facilities are not being dismantled. The nuclear facilities are being expanded. Isn't that wonderful? However, the U.S. headquarters, the military headquarters, has moved south from the city of Seoul to a position some dozens or scores of miles south of there. That looks like that was planned, right? They needed a new headquarters. That may not be appeasement. Big issue this week was the restriction of Chinese investment in the United States. Yes, restrict such investment. Don't be a useful idiot for the Belt and Road. Don't join the Belt and Road Forum, or BARF, as it's known. The Chinese, of course, had promised that they would build islands that would not be militarized. And, of course, they're being militarized to the hilt. And this impudent Xi, this windbag of Beijing, with his obviously this Maoization that he's undergone has gone straight to his head. But now the Russians. It's going to be Trump and Putin, Finlandized. Will the United States emerge from this as a satellite and puppet of Russia? Will Trump try to quit the World Trade Organization? Some say he will. Will Trump announce the U.S. is quitting NATO in the same way that he's quit the Paris Climate Accord, the Iranian JCPOA, and related stuff? Is he going to quit NAFTA? Are we dealing with somebody who's carrying out Russian policies because he believes in them, because he's brainwashed, because he's blackmailed? Well, we ought to find out all of that, and we should find it very, very quickly. Are we headed towards autarky here in the U.S., right? Soviet Union was autarkical. The original autarky was Mussolini after invading Ethiopia, his way to be free from the League of Nations. We're told that Kelly may be leaving, that he might be replaced by Mulvaney, the most corrupt, or by Nick Ayers, the chief of staff to Pence. The turnover in the Trump White House is now up to 61%. It is absolutely chaotic. Do take a look on the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. The fight between Rosenstein, who won with the help of Ray, against Slickums Gowdy and Jim Jordan. You can also get the name of the woman, and we'll talk about her more in the coming weeks, right? The one who's challenging Jordan in the general election. But here are now some general ideas, right? We started with general ideas from Ted Kennedy's 1987 speeches. Let's think about what it would mean to limit Trump. There were some attempts in the Congress to try to pass some kind of a resolution saying, Trump should not sell out the country, Trump should not wreck the results of 70 or 80 years of diplomacy. Let's compare Trump to the Doge of Venice. And the reason the Doge, or Doge of Venice, Duca, right, the leader, the Duke, what do we learn from this? That was an oligarchy, so they wanted to make sure that it didn't turn into a dictatorship, because that was always the problem. And if you had chief executives like the Doge, then you wanted to make sure that he was circumscribed, right, that he couldn't do a whole lot. So one thing was, if you were the Doge of Venice, you were generally forbidden by law to leave the city. You were going to be in the Doge's palace for the rest of your life. And the only way to get out of that would be to go through a passageway into the Basilica of San Marco, St. Mark's Cathedral, which is right next door. Take a look at it, or better yet, go there. And this was a guy kept under strict surveillance. The Doge was kept under strict surveillance. Now, some of that comes from John Julius Norwich, written Norwich. But I have here a wonderful little book, 1902, Horatio Brown, The Venetian Republic. And what do we learn about the limited powers and the surveillance that was extended to the Doge? The Doge worked all day long with six privy councilors, without their presence and approval, signing on, no official act was valid. The Doge, Serenissimo, began working in the morning He got his 6 privy councillors there, without whose presence no official act of his was valid, no dispatches could be opened, and no replies given to correspondence. He couldn't even open an envelope without those guys there watching over you. Then we have the Savii, Savii, I guess, or one I. Savio means a cabinet minister, in effect. They came in and they did, they went through the decisions on the things that were in their respective portfolio. Letters to foreign powers were drawn up, but this was all done together with the privy councillors and the Savii. The Doge had the initiative in the sense that he was the chairman of the meetings and he could propose the topics. But after that, it was voting by these groups. And these people, of course, all are Venetian oligarchs. Now, when they would meet ambassadors, either ambassadors that said, we want to come in, or that the Venetians themselves want to call in. In all of these meetings, and you go through the etiquette of those, on all of these multifarious occasions and topics, it was the Doge who replied. Sometimes he would have 3 or 4 ambassadors come in one day. But here's what he would say. The Doge was not the decider, but he was the spokesman. He was the mouthpiece of the Republic. He was expected to answer in language whose dignity and gravity should adequately represent the majesty of the Venetian state, but should not in any way commit the government to any specific line of action. The formula usually ran, quote, this I can say to you, Mr. Ambassador, but if these gentlemen, the Savii and the privy councillors, if they have anything further to add, they will do so if they see fit, or maybe even more explicit. This I can say of myself, but this matter will be brought before the Council of 10 or before the Senate, whose decision will be communicated to you. So he couldn't answer anything. It's the opposite of Trump, right? He couldn't say, we're going to call off the military drills, no more Ulchi Freedom Guardian, or anything of the sort. So once the cabinet council was over, the Doge had to go to the Council of 10. This was the supreme power, and or the Senate, which was also a considerable power. But the idea is he was rigorously subordinated, circumscribed, monitored, surveilled, limited, and so forth. And that's what we need if we want to make it through. In other words, we need the Congress to essentially take over those functions. And we'll see you next week. Catch us at AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, Monday evening at 9 p.m. We'll have plenty of news. See you then.